Hello everybody. Hopefully you can see the slides are not in the best format, but we'll carry on. So I didn't want to spend too much time talking about who I was or what I am. Just some fun facts. I've sold the most Tupperware in the East Midlands once upon a time, and I've been considered the Italian chef of our generation. But in my day job, I work at Spotify as a developer advocate, and I wanted to share some of the things that we've learned at Spotify as we've built our abstractions as Spotify has grown into the company that you know and love today. So what's an abstraction? So an abstraction is a tool for clarity and analysis. It allows us to focus on general principles. And here you see I've got a really nice abstraction on my screen behind me, which I'm just going to try and make just a tiny bit bigger, and hopefully that doesn't nose that up. There. Okay. So you see this abstraction. However, the thing with an abstraction is it's a trade-off, because every step towards an abstraction involves leaving something behind, some information. It's obscured. So I promise this isn't an eye test and you're not going to be graded on this, but you can see moving from pictures from left to how the image becomes slightly more blurry as we become to abstract it. But that information that's available on the first side is probably really critical for somebody. And as we begin to abstract that information, we've started to make this a bit more complex. And we've lost what was originally featured in the original picture. And so what I want to do is I want to take you back into how this all started at Spotify. And so a question that might keep some of you awake at night, this might not be a technical thing, whether you're in technology or not, but you might have been working on a system, or you might have been working on some infrastructure, or you might be like me, you might be just away for the day and your son calls you because your Wi-Fi's gone down. And the person who's needed, the expert, like in my son's case, it's me because I manage our Wi-Fi at home. And at work, when I'm building code, there's senior engineers. They're not around to help you. They're just not there. And the abstraction, which has been built for you to make this really simple, has now become your biggest enemy. So in this talk today, what I'm going to talk about is how at Spotify we learned this the hard way. But more importantly, not what we did around it, but how we fix this and what we learned from this. This isn't just going to be a talk where I talk about code and abstractions just within code. This is about operational knowledge which keeps our system up and running as our teams grow and expand at Spotify. So a lot of the things that you'll hear me talk about here, these universal challenges, they're not necessarily just related to Spotify, they're industry-wide. I've seen these at a number of companies that I've worked with and engaged with over the years. And some of those are things like onboarding developers into complex systems while still maintaining your sort of velocity and you're able to ship that code or product. You want to be able to maintain operational excellence throughout that entire journey as well. The next piece is balancing your developer productivity with full transparency as well. And then finally, some of the things we'll talk a little bit later about in this is how do you build abstractions? If you're building abstractions and that's your responsibility, how do you build these so that these help rather than hinder your teams or your developers? So to really enjoy this sort of whole story and to be 100% transparent with you all, I want to go back to 2014, which doesn't seem that long ago. But Spotify was growing very rapidly in that place. It was one of the sort of like pivotal moments of Spotify, and Spotify was changing from being a music streaming app to more of a personalized music experience. Because of this huge growth and the success that Spotify was having, this meant that we were taking on more engineers and more developers. In fact, we were hiring more rapidly than ever before in the company history. And we still wanted to keep this motto of ship fast and ship often. But this is what the growth metrics didn't show us. While we were celebrating all of these great user acquisitions, something troubling was happening internally. Our new developers that we'd hired were taking as long as 60 days to hit their 10th pull request. 60 days is quite a considerable amount of time, and this is a key metric that we track quite closely. So when we took a step back and looked at these, this showed us that just that metric alone, our key onboarding metrics were showing deterioration. This wasn't onboarding. This was like archaeological excavation for new engineers. But then we sat confused for a second and thought, how is this even possible? We've built beautiful, clean APIs. We have functioning interfaces. Our systems are all documented really well. We've built this marvelous abstraction. And the abstraction hid the messy complex underneath of the system. But this was making incident responses harder. Again, speaking with our senior engineers, they'd done exactly what we'd asked them to do. They built the abstraction, which simplified all of the deployments. But when things broke, and they do break, when things broke, whether it was during the day or at 3 a.m., the beautiful abstractions just turned into opaque walls. The moment that something went wrong for one of the newer developers, and let's not take away how good they were, they could build code and ship. But as soon as something went wrong, the abstraction didn't help them. To them, it became a cognitive brick wall. And so picture this. You're in your incident room, you're in an outage. This might be something that you're all familiar with. And if this starts to sort of trigger memories for you like it does me sometimes, I apologize. The service is down, and the senior engineer who built this is away. They're not there to support you. The abstraction that you're working with made the development of what you've built faster is now making the recovery of that service impossible. It might be something that's down in the data layer. You don't know where that is, what that is, or why that is. You just know it's down. This is what I call the abstraction trap. I think I might have gone back a slide. That's it. Sorry. No. This one. Abstraction trap. This is the point that I mentioned, where the thing that is designed to help you has now become your biggest liability. What we found was that the abstractions that were built at Spotify were great in the 90% of the time, which is fantastic. But in the 10% of the time, in the corner cases, in the outages, in the crisis moments, the abstractions didn't illuminate the areas which we needed them to. But this is what made the difference. It's how you approach something, how you approach this problem. Learning from failure isn't something we do just after incidents at Spotify. This is part of our core culture. This means that our incident reviews don't just aim to fix what is broke. They're designed to surface patterns, understandings, things like black swan failures. But most importantly, it's to distribute that learning across the team and the organization. This is crucial because this then becomes for us the cultural foundation. It means that we're not just trying to prevent failures, we're actively trying to learn from them at the same time. So you might think, yeah, this comes at a cost, and it does. It comes at a real cost. This isn't just increasing longer, say, incident responses. Yeah, those are painful. But the hidden cost is knowledge here and passing that knowledge on. Knowledge atrophy, if you like. Our senior engineers are always going to be happy when the junior engineers can ship features without bothering them. The problem became in that where this knowledge gap happened is the senior engineers became the only ones who truly knew how our systems really worked. If you think about it, that means that you're creating knowledge silos which are disguised as good engineering practices. So what did it teach us again? Something fundamental about software at scale and building software engineering at scale. In the case of abstraction, it taught us what a critical difference is between abstraction and oversimplification. As I mentioned at the start with the slide pictures of the buildings, abstraction should reduce cognitive load while preserving the ability to dig deeper into something if and when you need to. But if you make this in an oversimplification way, all you're doing is hiding that complexity. And you're hiding it until that critical moment that it explodes in your face. So, how do you build systems that are approachable for your newcomers, but transparent enough for your senior engineers and the more experienced members you have on your staff? How do you create the abstraction that educates rather than obscure? So I've got three things on my screen: happy path, context layer, and deep lives. These are fundamental to us. And I think about this like the chapter of a book, chapter 1. You get all the basic information from chapter 1, but if you wanted to dig deeper, you'd need to go into the appendix of chapter 1 to get those details. So the abstractions now which we build have happy paths, context layers, and deep dives. A happy path is what 80% of your users would need 80% of the time. A context layer shows what's happening under the hood, and the deep dive gives full system access to when things break. I'm a big believer that abstractions should teach and not hide, and that each natural level should lead to the next when it's needed rather than hiding it. So when we started to build better abstractions, we stopped thinking about them as just black boxes, and we started thinking about them as more educational tools. The best abstractions should progressively reveal a complexity that builds a good key understanding. And we can do this in 3 ways. And we have a plugin architecture within our abstraction which allows this customization. We have a golden path, which is our software template. What this does is it encodes operational wisdom to our engineers, not just boilerplate. It's basically built on distilled lessons at building services at Spotify and at scale. We have the plugin which is called Service Catalog. This doesn't show just how Service A connects to, say, Service B. It actually shows the full nature of the dependency of this, things like reliability metrics and also failure scenarios. And then we have Tech Docs, which is built-in technical documentation. This acts as a foundational tool for operational education for anybody who's interested and is learning about something or just wants to deploy something. They can go into the Tech Docs. What happens with Tech Docs and the way that it's structured is it makes sure that every interaction depends on that system's understanding, linking it back to that service catalog. This customization of the plugins is encoding an eclectic operational wisdom, and it does this through default. Of course, it's human nature for all of us to want to deviate and to go down our own path, but the system would help you understand that and also the implications of being able to actually doing that. So the problems that we're solving here, as I mentioned, they're not just about abstractions. It's about scaling operational knowledge. It's always been troubling to me of how you can take hard-won wisdom from experts like yourselves, and wisdom from your senior engineers you have on your team, and then distribute this, but without creating that bottleneck, that silo that I spoke of. So this was a key moment for us. We learned to treat knowledge just like infrastructure. The operational wisdom is encoded in the platform, as I showed you in the plugins. This means that a new engineer can follow expert debugging paths. The continuous learning part means that every system interaction should become a learning opportunity. It should build your operational knowledge, your intuition. Now, normally this took years to develop within a company. And then how do you keep that knowledge fresh? We know our systems evolve, but knowledge evolves with them. And what this does is it prevents documentation rot. The whole transformation, onboarding metrics, as we implemented these steps, we watch all of our metrics improve dramatically. Our developers and engineers became a lot more capable at key milestones where they were being measured. The senior engineers were a lot more happier, smiley faces, because they could focus on actually building better. They were less interrupted. And the more junior members of staff were able to fill those knowledge gaps on their own. So the solution which we developed and eventually we open sourced in 2020 was called Backstage, and we donated this to the CNCF. In the donation, we believe that this represents our belief that these challenges aren't just unique to Spotify, like I spoke about in the universal challenges. The whole principle of building abstractions is building abstractions that teach, creating that graduated disclosure, treating knowledge as infrastructure, and making this applicable across the industry. The hope to this is that these patterns just become foundational to developer experience. I guess more like container orchestration has become synonymous with infrastructure management. The ultimate goal isn't just faster onboarding or making nice, pretty, happy interfaces. It's also operational resilience. So if you're building an abstraction, your abstractions should, while they should simplify, they should also teach. And when your tools build this great understanding, rather than hide the complexity, what you're doing is you're creating teams that can handle the unexpected, the 3 a.m. calls and the outages. You end up building systems that don't just work when everything goes right, but can also remain debuggable when things do or if systems go wrong. So quickly, what's the takeaway here? The abstractions that you build, whether you're deploying these monitoring tools, dashboards, incident response processes, they're not just functional tools. Think about them like distributed mechanisms. When you're working on an abstraction, I always like to think, does this abstraction help people understand the system better? Or again, am I just hiding complexity here with a pretty interface? If it breaks at 3 a.m., will the on-call engineer learn something about how the systems work? Or will it just leave them scratching their head, leaving them even more confused, having to escalate this? The 3 principles I've tried to put in just a couple of points here is, can I trace through this so that when someone goes wrong, can they understand and follow the breadcrumbs and understand what happened? Does this actually teach me something? When you're following the abstraction, you're actually learning something, or are you just following role procedures? And then finally, can you graduate that understanding? That means, is there a natural path from basic usage to, say, deep understanding of system knowledge? A reliability of a system isn't just about hiding the complexity like we showed in the abstraction. It's about making it approachable. It's about making it manageable. And your abstractions should bridge understanding, not build walls around it. As we've learned, the best abstractions don't just solve problems, they help transfer knowledge and build capability. So if you're building tools, contributing to open source, designing processes, try to focus on systems that scale operationally where knowledge grows alongside the terminology. I've got a great event happening live on the 22nd of October, which will show you a little bit more about this and jump into the abstractions itself. Please take a screenshot. Hopefully the QR code works. There's another QR code there, which is much prettier. You can ask us anything on that. If you have questions on this, we can follow up and we can talk about abstractions. But I think we've got time for a couple of questions. Thank you.
Ooh. As far as like abstractions go, would you say that there's a recommended layer or number of extractions that you should kind of stick to before you start running into problems?
I think, yeah, that could be down to trial and error of your system and what you're actually showing. I think, as I was mentioning before, is if those sticking to those 3 steps, is if you're able to trace through it. To me, it's like I likened it at the start, almost like an eye test. As you're taking a step back from it, does it get more blurry? You can see my glasses are quite thick, so I have to stand quite close to things these days. But that's my general advice. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all for actually how many particular steps. If I was to hazard a guess, I'd say no more than 3, maximum of 5. But great question. Thank you.
Any more questions?
The gentleman behind you.
When you talk about those junior developers that are using the abstraction layers, how do you find is the best way to get feedback from them? Or do you use feedback from them to understand how you can improve those layers and processes?
Absolutely, great question. So everybody follows the golden path when they're learning to build software at Spotify. It's pretty much part of the onboarding. We follow like a golden path of how to do that. Throughout that journey, there's a feedback process which can be utilized for somebody to see when and where that is actually the parts of their understanding start to tip from the wayside. I'd like to think now that we've got quite good at this through robust feedback, but our Backstage is just constantly evolving. We're constantly pushing out new features to make that actually more clearer and to put more clarity into those pieces. So it's as we start to advance our architectural plugin in there, we build those features not only through the open source community feedback, but also from customer and partner feedback as well, who use the system as well. So feedback is coming in from a lot more places as it's rolled out before that the plugin architecture is actually implemented. So when somebody says we need more, I'm debugging this or working on this and I need this, I need entities or I need to track a certain thing, there are features that we can add in there to make that process easier. It's a very open and clear process to be able to do that. But yeah, super question. Thank you.
Do you think Backstage itself at some point could become an abstraction?
Wow, that's a great question. I'd like to say no. I don't think so. I think what we've built with this, we've built this since 2014 on the mantra of build like Spotify in that sense. And so it's one of the reasons why we were so proud to open source Backstage, and you can actually have this as a hosted solution called Portal as well, where you can do this where everything is at the front of it. I see your point. I used to work in infrastructure at one point, and if you imagine like you've got your sort of layer 3 sort of thing, and then you had the abstraction on top of that, and then one more on top of that. I think at this stage where Portal sits within that, I think anything above that, I couldn't see that being useful. Thank you, but awesome question.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.